Sure.
Bonjour et bienvenue à Entre cadres, grâce à l'École de la fonction publique. Je m'assois avec François Legault, un cadre supérieur de la fonction publique, pas mal chevronné, qui est aussi expert dans le domaine de santé mentale. Often when we hear mental health, we think actually of mental illness, when in fact mental health is that state in which we are the most productive, the most creative, when we are best fit for purpose as human beings. Il y a la question qui se pose comme leader, comme quelqu'un responsable d'autres fonctionnaires qui fournissent des services aux clients et qui doit prendre soin d'eux-mêmes. C'est une bonne question. Qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire comme cadre supérieur bien occupé pour encourager la santé mentale au travail? Let's ask that of François Legault. Given your expertise, clinical, as an executive, as well as having advised the Mental Health Commission of Canada and playing a role at Treasury Board Secretariat in the policy development, the memorandum to cabinet, the business case, I should say, as well as your own work in operations in Health Canada, providing EAP services, Employee Assistance Program, to most of the federal public service. What's the key thing that a leader can do to promote mental health for their staff, for their clients, and for themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would start with providing doing what's necessary for your own mental health first and foremost, because as the role of a leader is sometimes requiring that you put aside your own reactions to things, and you become sort of a scratching post for a lot of the staff that depend on you, and even your colleagues, and to some degree your superiors, right? And so your task as an executive is to get things done. And there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So even if we don't feel that pressure, it doesn't mean that it's there. I'm thinking
doesn't mean
back,
it's not there.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that it's not there, and we may feel stronger, and we can get surprised at times of how we react to situations that we never thought would trigger us. I'm speaking from my own experience, personal experience, but also some of the wisdom that I've heard from retired General Romeo Dallaire, who as a leader in a very high stress situation, I'm sure you appreciate, was able to live this experience where he wasn't able to necessarily connect with his needs, basic needs like sleeping, for example.
While being focused on the genocide in East Africa.
Well, that's it. And even in connection with his emotions, he had to put that aside to be operational. And sometimes we do that as executives. And it's okay, because we can delay emoting. We can delay connecting with our underlying emotions and feelings about things. But we need to plan for that, because our busy lives at work don't allow us to do that, and perhaps we also have busy lives at home. Mm-hmm. Some of the executives are the part of the sandwich generation now.
Looking after kids and parents at the same time.
Exactly, so that's the definition. And so for them, it's finding a time where they can be with them by themselves, shut down the brain for a while, and just let the rest of the body respond to what's happening. So in the story from General Dallaire, if you've read some of his books and even went to some of his conferences, he has said at least twice in the conferences I attended, where he was surprised by his reaction when he started shooting dogs indiscriminately, because he was seeing the dogs eat some of the deceased in this horrible, horrible situation of genocide. Yeah. And he, at that time, realized, oh, I lost it. Because I'm doing this in front of my troops, they will not be able to rely on me anymore, because I lost control over my emotions. And so he said, I knew at that time that I needed to be replaced. So we don't want that to happen for executives. We don't want to burn the midnight candle by both ends, and we don't want to be in a situation where we have to retire because we're totally exhausted and we've done things, we've been surprised by our own emotions. So I would say you have to be calm. This is more like, how do we want to project good mental health ourselves? We want to model that in a certain degree. Perhaps not the emotional part always, but to show the human part of ourselves too. that we do need some time off.
Souvent, c'est vu comme une force, le fait que je ne montre pas mes émotions, que je ne me traite pas comme être humain. When in fact, I'm a resource of the government of Canada that I may be mistreating. Est-ce qu'il y a des conseils parce que je note que vous avez mentionné que...
That's like cover your assets kind of a situation. Because you're an asset, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
And
we are a
agree.
resource of the public service.
Absolument. On est un investissement. Le gouvernement a investi de la formation, souvent des milliers de dollars de formation, que ce soit même formation linguistique pour certains d'entre nous, formation de leadership,
ou
que l'école,
technique,
à l'école ici, vous en offrez beaucoup, mais ça coûte des sous. C'est un investissement. Surtout ton salaire, puis tout ça, c'est super cher, ça, là. Ça fait que ça coûte cher au gouvernement.
Pas que je me rappelle, mais...
Mais après impôt, évidemment. Fait que donc, tout ça pour dire qu'on on a besoin de prendre... On est souvent poussé à penser à bien gérer les ressources, puis on oublie qu'on en est une aussi pour le gouvernement fédéral. Fait que, puis pour les gens autour de nous. Fait que donc, revenir à ta question, si je peux, aussi, c'est d'être sensible aux sentiments, puis aux besoins de ces troupes, donc les gens qui travaillent pour nous, puis être un peu proactif aussi, aller explorer comment les gens, sachant qu'ils ont peut-être vécu quelque chose de difficile ou qu'ils ont fait du surtemps récemment, c'est de faire une connexion puis d'aller dire, mais comment ça va? Je réalise que tu as mis beaucoup de temps, beaucoup d'efforts là-dedans. Je réalise que peut-être c'est difficile puis c'est évident. Qu'est-ce que vous avez fait? Comment vous vous sentez? Est-ce que tu as besoin d'un repos? Souvent, les gens sur lesquels on dépend le plus comme exécutif, c'est des gens qui ont un niveau très élevé de rendement, de performance. High-performing individuals. And who wouldn't want to have a team of high performers, right? I remember hiring you because you were a high performer. So getting high performers around you is the ideal situation, and you can delegate and you can trust them to get things done, and that releases you from certain worries and stuff, and that's good for your own mental health. But at the same time, you don't want to burn them out. And they may be a bit like the moth and the flame. The more tasks you give them, the more excited they get and the more passionate they get. And that could be a sign of danger for themselves too. So sometimes we have to be a little bit more of a big sister, big brother, and say, whoa, I want to give you this file, this challenge, but I would like to try it out on somebody else too. So that just to share the wealth, share the excitement, and I'd rather let you go to the next phase of your project, which may be less exciting, but because there's just so much excitement.
Yes, true.
We can live.
The stimulation for a lot
Well, we
of us.
discover this with our teenagers.
Oh yeah.
I happen to have some, so I know. So, avec les adolescents, on sait que la stimulation constante jusqu'aux petites heures du matin nuit à leur sommeil, à leur repos, à leur santé physique et mentale. On a plus de troubles anxieux chez les jeunes qu'on n'a jamais vécu de façon statistique. Puis ce qui est vraiment différent, c'est l'Internet, c'est des téléphones, c'est la constante contact avec les autres puis les communications. Ils sont constamment en train de faire deux choses. On dit souvent aux exécutifs, vous allez toujours jongler avec plusieurs projets en même temps. Mais nos adolescents n'ont même pas maturé, puis ils sont déjà en train de gérer avec plusieurs choses en même temps. Tu leur parles, puis ils sont sur le... Attends une minute, pas... bon, puis clic.
Juste donne-moi un instant pendant.
Puis toi aussi. Ça fait que donc, tout ça pour que finalement, leur tête n'est jamais reposée. Fait que moi et mon épouse, on avait dit à nos jeunes, quand on allait faire du camping, notre but, notre objectif, c'est que vous trouvez ça plate. We want you to get bored because you need to have time where you're disconnected completely. You just so those phones, give us your phones, we're going to go. So, of course, it was met with, oh, no, But eventually, they connected with other youth. They connected with nature. We were able to do things in family. And I think we've contributed to prevent some damage to their brains because of this constant stimulation. So the same with high performers. They're like teenagers in a way. They have lots of energy and they can handle a lot of stuff, but you have to be careful about them too.
And that strength, the capacité d'absorber beaucoup de stress. En même temps, ça peut être une de mes faiblesses.
Yeah, it's a strength and it's a double-edged sword, right? Every strength that we have can be a double-edged sword.
Right.
We may be very good at something, and if we do too much of it, we pay the price.
Right.
So the same for that too. And I think also what we can do if we go to doing it for our unit, our work unit.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't think we need to explore how a mentally healthy workplace contributes to greater productivity and better rapport and greater health overall. We know that.
It's so
Studies
clear
are there.
that it's boosts innovation, creativity, collaboration, productivity,
Absolutely.
reliability,
Yeah.
resilience.
So all of that we know. But the question is, so how do we make that happen in a unit? Perhaps a new unit we just inherited and we're working with these people.
Sure.
Focus on their strength. I would say focus on their strength. What do these folks do well and do easy? And then do they have enough challenge? Balance the challenge with their capacity. Give them new challenges, support them in that. That's just good management. And good management equals good mental health too. So going back to basics, I think. We go back to basics when it comes to mental health. We go back to Psychology 101, la pyramide de Maslow.
Oui.
You know, like, do they have a safe job? In the public sector, yeah, in many cases they're safer.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time we go through periods of contraction, and so that's anxiety provoking for federal workers. But contrary to shutting down and going for bankruptcy and releasing everybody and take their pension plan with you, there are some security. So from the Maslow perspective, being a federal public servant and even an executive is pretty stable around that thing. But perhaps the other levels need to be worked on. For example, knowing that you're important. I think we sometimes have to remind ourselves how important we are because we don't hear it from the public at large.
Right.
We may hear it within the federal public service to a certain degree, but recognition and rewards is really important. And I know we've done.
It need not be a certificate. It can just be an acknowledgement
Yeah.
in front of my peers.
Yeah, and rewarding for actual prowess, rewarding for actual contribution as opposed to rewarding the whole unit, although there's just a few individuals that actually did the work, in order to prevent conflict from happening. Sometimes we are a little too cautious about that human element of jealousy and competition.
Sure.
It's there, it's going to be there anyway. So making sure that the rewards are given and recognition to the people who actually done something extraordinary as opposed to try to give rewards and medals to everybody like we do with kids these days.
Sure.
Because we're afraid of people being upset or insulted or jealous.
So there's a great deal there in terms of it's not sufficient for me as an executive to think I'm getting what I need. I'm getting the deliverables. Quelqu'un me donne ce que j'ai demandé. Ça n'indique pas que ça vaut pas la peine de m'assurer que leur santé mentale est bien traitée en même temps.
C'est de regarder le processus. Est-ce que les gens ont eu du fun à le faire?
Yeah.
Est-ce que les gens souriaient?
Yeah.
Est-ce que les gens s'amusaient? Quand un des collègues vivait un moment difficile, est-ce qu'il y avait du soutien des pairs? Est-ce qu'il y avait une collégialité de soutien? Alors, si ce n'était pas là, on peut, nous, le commencer. On peut démontrer l'importance en agissant, en arrêtant. OK, stop the presses. We need to talk to this individual. We need to focus on helping this person go through this difficult period.
Right.
If it comes from the leader, then you create an organizational culture within that unit that will support each other. That support is so important. I've coached executives. I've had executives report to me in senior positions, and sometimes they're afraid of that collegiality, the fear of them all ganging up against a hard boss, for example.
Oh.
Like, let's be honest. Sometimes we say, well, maybe it's better to create division than to actually encourage people to talk and to work together. So I've seen that happen, and regrettably, then sometimes our role is to intervene and to educate that manager to say, no, you have to trust your people.
Right.
You're not going down the right road here.
Right.
Perhaps they've learned that from previous work settings where people were at, en français on dit à couteau tiré, people were constantly worried about each other and outperforming in a competitive way. That is not healthy, and it'll destroy the asset, the resource that the government has developed. So managing that and being very careful. I think the number one enemy in a setting where people have, where it's difficult to terminate an employee, let's be honest, in the federal public service, is to see an employee who behaves in a way that harms everybody else. And we're trying to contain the behavior, and it takes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before finally terminating that employee. I've coached people through the process, and we suspect it's a mental health issue, so therefore we don't act on administratively to address the behavior. If we go back to the national standard on psychological health and safety,
Right.
psychological safety is one key element. Donc la sécurité psychologique de vos employés devient aussi importante que les troubles de santé mentale puis l'aide à un individu qui agit de façon à blesser les autres. Donc des lésions psychologiques qui viennent d'un individu qui est hors contrôle au niveau de son comportement, il faut que ça soit contenu, il faut que ça soit discipliné, adressé immédiatement. Puis en ce faisant, comme chef, vous allez avoir le respect de vos troupes. Ces gens-là vont avoir confiance en vous comme leader. Mais si vous laissez ça aller, puis vous espérez que les pairs interviennent, OK? À ce moment-là, vous cultivez de l'harcèlement, vous cultivez de la colère, vous cultivez des conflits dans le milieu du travail. Il vaut mieux adresser les choses de façon responsable le plus tôt possible. Ne pas attendre que ça devienne lourd et difficile d'intervenir. Moi, je dirais que c'est un des conseils que, dans mon expérience puis dans mon coaching que je fais avec les exécutifs, là, c'est de dire il faut aller chercher ce courage-là, puis les ressources nécessaires pour nous aider à bien adresser la situation, même si on veut des fois aider la personne, il y a des comportements qui sont juste inacceptables.
And there are times when we know that there's a lot of work goes into managing specific situations or individuals who are going through challenges in the workplace. At the same time, managing the workplace in a way that strengthens the mental health of everybody there. Because as you indicated, some folks are dealing with mental health challenges, but everybody has mental health. I could have the mental health equivalent of a paper cut that's really irritating me, or a cold, or a broken leg, or a pregnancy, or diabetes, long before we're talking about anything way down the road.
Sure.
And how I contribute to my mental health is as important as how I contribute to my physical health.
This is where we talk about resilience. There's a whole set of research and stuff that I often teach in the courses I give, mental health first aid, the working mind, and these are some of the products that I've taught a lot. Actually, I think I've crossed the 100 courses that I've given so far in my semi-retirement mode as a consultant. And what I discover is exactly that, is the whole issue of making sure that people focus on the strength, not just the weaknesses. Saying that, we come back to the workplace, the work unit, as I think you were asking about. So in the workplace, if you just use the 13 psychosocial risk factors that were developed in the national standard, right? Of which I'm an author, right?
Yes.
So that's why I keep
yes. It is nonetheless the national standard.
Yeah.
Psychosocial health.
So those 13 factors come from research into workplace health and workplace mental health. So if you look at those, there may be some that are very strong in your workplace. And you may have used the Public Service Employee Survey to identify those.
Right.
You may use the word guarding minds and other freebies that you can use to do that. I know that I've worked actually as a consultant with the school to help do that with one unit here. And they found, if I go back to that one for your school, was that there were some real strength. Engagement was super strong in that workplace. And the risk is that we're going to neglect those and only focus on those that are problematic.
Here, here.
We have to work on both, because as you focus on the strength of your organization, you increase the resilience of your whole staff. And this is something that we've said, and we know for sure that people just forget about.
So as you take
don't
the
neglect
steps,
the strengths.
So as you take the steps that will strengthen the mental health for the well-being, for the operation as a whole.
You need to maintain and not neglect what's already working well.
Right.
So you remember probably some of my coaching style
Yes.
as a boss, where I would say, so tell me about what worked
I've
well
had
this
15
week.
years to heal, but yes.
Yeah, well, therapy works, obviously. Is to say, what has worked well for you this week? How did you sell that to the client? How did you get them to agree and sign that memorandum of understanding? And then sometimes it would take my staff, and perhaps you too, off guard, because you expect to talk about problems
Yes.
with
Yes.
your boss. And instead, it was like, let's focus on what you did well and let's dissect that. Let's really spend time to understand, how did you do that? Because that skill you can use to address your problem, right? Or you can give confidence to people so they can actually address the conflict in the workplace. They can react to something that they found hurtful.
It's more of an appreciative inquiry approach. What is working? What do I want more of?
As
What is
opposed
working
to
well?
what's not working well.
Yep. As an executive in the public service, if I was to pick one thing that I could do that have the greatest impact in my shop, what might it be?
Smile, be calm, have fun in the job that you do, and don't neglect the importance of the work that your staff and yourself do. Focus on that and say, we are important to Canadians, we're important to federal public service, we are deserving of the security and the pay that we get.
Good stuff. In the 10 minutes we have left, participants are welcome to click on the participate button if they have a question they'd like to put to François Legault, an experienced executive, a respected leader in the employee assistance community, and an author. Give us the name again. An author, one of the authors of the National Standard.
National Standard on Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace.
Awesome. The idea of safety in the workplace
The
as well as health.
Z1003-13 from CSA Group.
Right. Thank you.
Or the BNQ 9300.
I'm sure there's someone in comms who's very pleased that that labeling has been applied.
I'm saying this for accountants and people.
Yes, cool.
Number of people.
So
Exactly.
what resources are available if I, as an executive, want to avail myself of some supports, or I want to encourage my my staff to make use of supports?
Yeah.
Not because you have a problem, you should do this,
Yeah.
but because, hey, we can all be stronger.
Well, Employee Assistance Services provides most departments and for that matter, agencies and even some crown corporations with employee assistance program. They have a specialized organizational services unit,
Right.
as you know well, who they specialize in helping the person identify what is going wrong that they would like to fix in the workplace. They have quite a menu of different consultants and psychosocial interveners who can actually
Masters in social work,
yeah.
psychologists.
Right, and some experienced mediators. Some smaller organizations don't have, how would I say, a strong alternative dispute resolution or
informal conflict management.
Informal conflict management unit. So they can tap into what SOS provides. And of course, if we suspect that there's a mental health issue, sometimes getting some coaching on how to approach that employee.
Coaching for me and how to deal with
how to approach and how to have that difficult conversation. We're often frightened to even open the can of worms with regards to a mental illness.
Right.
When in fact, people suffer from mental illness at a rate right now where there's enough people suffering on a daily basis that they could probably elect a minority government. So I mean, we're talking 25% of the population will have an emerging mental health problem in a year, in a 12-month period.
In a given year.
In a given year. So never mind those that are already suffering. If you add those, you're looking at 45% of your workforce who will at least one time in their career experience a mental illness. Never mind a mental health problem.
Right.
So it's now become the #1 cause of disability worldwide for those areas that actually document and can categorize mental illness as a disability. It manifests itself in so many facets that sometimes we just see it as a conflict, or we think this person's just a pain in the royal derriere, and but there may be something underlying there. How would I say, the behavior is the tip of the pyramid,
right?
Or the tip of the iceberg, and we don't see what's underneath unless we explore. So coaching that person to explore is sometimes very helpful.
I've encountered that. I have somebody I think is a difficult employee when in fact they're living an experience. They're not a difficult employee so much as they may be difficult to supervise for me until I get some information about how to deal with something like that.
People are overtaxed. On est surtaxé par des problèmes personnels, des problèmes au travail, des problèmes de santé physique aussi.
Oui.
Et puis on peut perdre notre patience, on peut perdre la façon qu'on fonctionne. J'aime ce que les partenaires, anciennement les partenaires pour la santé mentale, avaient comme campagne qui était Not Myself Today.
Not Myself Today, yeah.
Qui était une campagne de sensibilisation que, comme tu disais tantôt, à n'importe quel moment, on n'est pas à 100%. Hein? On n'est pas dans notre assiette, comme on dit. Hein? Donc, des fois, il faut aller chercher des ressources pour se remettre là-dedans. Malheureusement, on est souvent les derniers à savoir qu'on n'est pas dans notre assiette. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'un superviseur peut faire? Des fois, c'est de juste pointer du doigt au comportement qui peut être un indice à la personne que c'est le temps d'aller chercher de l'aide. Getting help at the earliest possible time increases the risk that help will be successful.
Increases the likelihood.
The likelihood, not a risk, yeah. The likelihood that it will be successful, and at the same time, it makes it less complex, and it prevents other dysfunctions from taking hold on the person's behavior and way of seeing the world. So you can prevent a depression from intervening very early when somebody's going through a grieving period. You can intervene in anxiety disorder by simply encouraging somebody to not avoid certain situations, but learn to cope with that anxiety.
It sounds a bit like the notion that immunity, the idea that I could have a depressed immune system, so I'm more likely to be, by overworking, all kinds of things, which leads to the likelihood of picking up something else. And it sounds a bit like a parallel to, in the absence of resilience, in the absence of consciously investing in the things that strengthen myself, that strengthen the mental health and the team, that I could actually be subjecting folks to a secondary issue that
it
presents
has ripple effects, absolutely.
Takes roots.
We see that, I'm sure we've all seen that in the workplace, that ripple effect from one individual who's not doing well, or even ourselves, and how we sometimes are surprised by how sensitive people are.
Yeah.
When I did a couple of 360 degrees, I was really surprised that you guys were worried about my mental health. But because you thought I was like working all the time and too passionate and too, and this and that. What you didn't know is that I would be able to completely disconnect and go home and just like be a lumberjack, go out in the forest and cut down trees.
It's when we talk more and more about work-life balance and the idea of work-life integration is happening more and more. There's an interesting notion that it's not about working so much, it's about not getting whatever for you constitutes a break. I could be working 37 and a half hours a week, but if my brain doesn't shut off from that, I'm in trouble.
Exactly.
Someone else might be working 45 hours a week, but they shut off from that and do other things. They might be okay.
Yeah. It comes back to an old Seinfeld episode where they say, serenity now. Like, I want that break and I want it now,
So if I want to strengthen my own mental health, promote it among my staff, to create conditions in which we all treat our clients in that matter. You mentioned a few direct services, employee assistance program, short-term counseling, and referral to other resources. You mentioned specialized organizational services, which is more proactive. You could get someone to come in and coach. Mediate,
and
team building.
And leaders call upon that service more than the frontline person.
Right. So the individual, I can call EAP, but I can also call in as a manager, as a leader. I can call in and get somebody now, can I?
Yeah, absolutely, The other thing is that employees can call upon EAP to find out how they can support a colleague going through a difficult period. They can discuss how the behavior of that employee and the impact it has on their own mental health, and get some support into how to plan to go and talk to the boss about it. So EAP at the very front line can help with those issues as well. But going back to the mental health of the whole team, I know that the feds, the federal government, and many crown corporations, and even now I have private sector clients who are implementing the standard or they're developing a mental health strategy for their unit. So we know that that's something important, and all the DMs have worked on this for a couple of years now. So we know that there's been these assessments of workplace factors that may actually impact on the health of employees and how to improve that. And sometimes it takes several years before you're going to see any major change.
Oui, oui.
So I would say to folks, be patient. The process does work. We had a 3-year case study done with 20 organizations from a variety of different settings who implemented the standard, and we were able to follow them over 3 years. And we found, again, that the outcomes were positive, but that it's a long-winded initiative. Yeah. And it's not a one-time thing. It's not a program. You're implementing a system similar to the system of health and safety.
Presque une culture.
Oui. And it involves everybody. So you need to have representation. So saying that, employees can help the organizational culture, the organizational climate themselves.
Oui, oui.
Don't wait for your supervisor to do it, your boss to do it.
N'importe qui peut le faire tout de suite. Ça veut dire
Tout
que
de suite,
de rester calme, sourire, être conscient de mon
oui.
impact sur d'autres mondes,
Oui.
conscient de ce que je peux faire pour aider d'autres mondes.
Oui, reconnaître la contribution de votre collègue au projet.
Oui.
Souligner des choses positives. Partager une pensée plus positive et équilibrée.
Oui.
Même quand on vit des moments difficiles.
Et que je me rappelle en même temps que je ne suis pas tout seul. Il y a d'autres mondes qui vivent la même expérience presque. Et qu'il y a des ressources que vous avez nommées.
As Red Green would say, we're all in this together. So let's work together to make this a better workplace. We're spending way too much time at work. So let's make it a pleasant and comfortable place where people can be authentic and honest and as much as possible and function and get things done as we're supposed to do.
François Legault, merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé tes conseils, vos conseils.
Merci, Dano.
Avec Entrecad, exécuteur grâce à l'école de la fonction publique. Merci beaucoup.
Ça fait plaisir.